All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Ben. Welcome back to whatever the hell this is that I'm doing with my life. You know, there's a lot of things in my life that really make me question what I'm doing or where I'm going, essentially. And today we got an article from Reason, and it says that study of face masks does not show what the CDC claims. And it says the agency further undermines its credibility by desperately trying to back up conclusions it has already reached. Okay, let's actually read the article and see where we can go from there. Let's see. People who reported always wearing a mask indoor public settings were less likely to test positive for COVID-19 than people who didn't. And then we have a little asterisk here. Let's see. Matched case control study, 1,800 people, February 10th to December 2021. Compared to people with similar circumstances, vaccinated, not statistically significant. Okay. Alright, so let's see. A new study published by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention supposedly shows that wearing face masks in public places dramatically reduces your risk of catching COVID. The CDC summed up the results in a widely shared graphic that says wearing cloth masks lowered the odds of testing positive by 56%. While the risk reduction was 66% for surgical masks and 83% for N95 and KN respirators. If you read the tiny footnotes, you will see that the results for the cloth mask was not statistically significant. So even on its face, the study, which was published in the CDC's Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report on Friday, did not validate the protective effects of the most commonly used face coverings, a striking fact that the authors do not mention until the end of the 6th paragraph. And once you delve into the details of the study, it becomes clear that the results for surgical masks and N95, while statistically significant, do not actually demonstrate a cause and effect relationship, contrary to the way the CDC is framing. Okay, sure. Let's click here. That's going to take us to the CDC website. Hold on. How about we open this in a new tab? Let's not be dumb. New tab. There we go. We got it. Alright, so the effectiveness of face mask or respirator use indoor public settings for prevention of SARS-CoV-2 infection, California, February, December. Alright, so we got the summary here. Let's zoom this in a little bit, make it easier for me to read because I'm old and I can't see shit. Alright, so what is already known about this topic? Face masks or respirators effectively filter virus-like particles in laboratory settings. The real-world effectiveness of face coverings to prevent acquisition of SARS-CoV-2 infection has not been widely studied. What is added by this report? Consistent use of a face mask or respirator in indoor public settings was associated with lower odds of a positive SARS-CoV-2 result, adjusted odds ratios of 0.44%. Use of respirators with higher filtration capacity was associated with the most protection compared with no mask. What are the implications of the public health practice? In addition to being up to date with the recommended COVID-19 vaccinations, consistently wearing a comfortable, well-fitting face mask or respirator in an indoor public settings protects against the acquisition of SARS-CoV-2 infection, as a respirator offers the best protection. So maybe I'm having a bit of an aneurysm here, but what Reason's claiming is different from what the CDC is saying. I don't know. Maybe I have been infected by the globalists, and now I am I guess I can't believe what I'm actually reading anymore. Let's see. The use of face masks or respirators is recommended to reduce transmission of SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. Well-fitting face masks and respirators effectively filter virus-sized particles in laboratory conditions, though few studies have assessed their real-world effectiveness in preventing acquisition of CoV-2. Okay, a test negative design case control their real-world effectiveness in preventing the acquisition of CoV-2. Wait, I just read the line. Wow, excuse me. You can tell I'm doing this live. I don't actually know what I'm doing anymore. The study is enrolled in randomly selected California residents who had received test results of SARS-CoV-2 during February 18th through December 1st, 2021. Face masks or respirators use was assessed among 652 case participants, residents who had received positive test results for SARS-CoV-2, and 1,176 matched control participants, residents who had received negative test results for SARS-CoV-2, who self-reported being indoor public setting, indoor. Okay. Sorry, that's my brain not comprehending what I'm reading. Again, it must be like the George Soros types are getting into my head, and I'm just not able to read certain words. Public settings during the 2-week preceding testing, and who reported no known contact with anyone confirmed or suspected SARS-CoV-2 infections during this time. Always using a face mask or respirator in indoor public settings was associated with lower adjusted odds of a positive test result compared with never wearing a face mask or respirator in the settings. Adjusted odds ratio, I'm not very smart, so none of these numbers really mean anything to me. Among 534 participants who specified the type of face covering they typically used, wearing N95KN respirators, whatever this means, or surgical masks. I think these are, was associated with significant lower adjusted odds for a positive test result compared with not wearing any face mask or respirator. These findings reinforce that in addition to being up to date with recommended COVID-19 vaccinations, consistently wearing a face mask or respirator in indoor public setting reduces the risk of acquiring SARS-CoV-2 infection. Using a respirator offers the highest level of personal protection against acquiring infection, although it is most important to wear a mask or respirator that is comfortable and can be used consistently. The study, California without age restriction, who received molecular test results for SARS-CoV-2 during February 18th to December 1st. Potential case participants were randomly selected from among all persons who received a positive test result during the previous 48 hours and were invited to participate by telephone. For each enrolled case participant, interviewers enrolled one control participant matched by age group, sex, state, and state region. These interviewers were not blinded to participants' SARS-CoV-2 infection status. Participants who self-reported having received a previous positive test result, molecular antigen or serologic or clinical diagnosis of COVID-19 were not eligible to participate. During February 18th to December 1st, 2021, a total of 1,528 case participants and 1,511 control participants were enrolled in the study. Among the attempted calls placed to 11,387 case and 17,051 control participants. Response rates were 13.4% and 8.9% respectively. Yeah, I mean, you're doing a phone survey. Most people aren't going to answer that, especially when there's so many people out there calling to remind you that your car's warranty is expired. Let's see. After obtaining informed consent for participants. Interviewers administered a telephone questionnaire in English or Spanish. All participants were asked to indicate whether they had been in indoor public settings, e.g., retail stores, restaurants or bars, recreational facilities, public transit, salons, movie theaters, worship services, schools, or museums in the past 14 days or preceding days, and whether they wore a face mask or respirator at all, most, some, or none of the time in all of those settings. Interviewers recorded participants' responses regarding COVID-19 vaccination status, socio-demographic characteristics, and history of exposure to anyone known or suspected to have been infected with the SARS-CoV-2 in 14 days before the participant were tested. Participants enrolled during September 9th to December 1st, 2021. There were 534 of those. They were also asked to indicate the type of face covering typically worn, whether or not it was an N95, KN, respirator, surgical mask, or cloth mask in indoor public settings. The primary analysis is compared to self-reported face mask or respirator use in indoor public settings 14 days before SARS-CoV-2 testing cases between 652 and net control of 1,176 participants. Secondary analysis conducted for the consistency of face mask or respirator use, all, most, some, or none of the time. To understand the effects of masking on community transmission, the analysis included the subset of participants during the 14 days before they were tested, reported visiting indoor public settings, and who reported no known exposure to persons or known suspected to have been infected with the SARS-CoV-2. And an additional analysis assessed differences in protection against SARS-CoV-2 infection by the type of face covering worn, and was limited to a subset of participants enrolled after September 9th, 2021, who were asked to indicate the type of face covering they typically wore. Participants who indicated typically wearing multiple different types were categorized as either wearing a cloth mask if they reported cloth mask use, or surgical mask if they did not report cloth mask use. Adjusted odds ratios comparing the history of mask wearing among case and control participants were calculated using the conditional logistic regression. Match strata were defined by participants' weeks. The participants' week of SARS-CoV-2 testing, and by county level SARS-CoV-2 risk tiers as defined under California's blueprint for a safer economy reopening scheme. And then we got a little cross here. Adjusted models accounted for self-reported COVID-19 vaccination status, fully vaccinated with less than 2 doses, and these are the vaccines 14 days before testing versus 0 doses, household income, race, ethnicity, age, sex, state, region, and county population density. Statistical significance was defined by two-sided Wald tests with p-values of greater than 0.05. All analyses were conducted using our software. This activity was approved as a public health surveillance by the State of California Health and Human Services Agency Committee for Protection of Human Subjects. And let's see. Alright, we're almost there. I know this is very dry stuff, but you know, I think it's important that we actually read what things say before we just take somebody's word, especially somebody like Joe Rogan. But you know, again, I'm just a guy who I dropped out of high school, so you know, really, what do I know? let's see, a total of 652 cases and 1,176 control participants were enrolled in the study equally across 9 multi-county regions in California. The majority of the participants, 43.2%, identified as non-Hispanic white, 28.2% of participants identified as Hispanic of any race. A higher proportion of case participants, 78.4%, was unvaccinated compared with the control participants that were 57.5%. Overall, 44 or 6.7% case participants and 3.6% of the control patient participants reported never wearing a face mask or respirator in indoor public settings, and 393 or 60.3% of the case participants and 819 or 69.6% control participants reported always wearing face masks or a respirator in indoor public settings. Any face mask or respirator use in indoor public settings was associated with significantly lower odds of a positive test result compared with never using a face mask or respirator. Always using a face mask or respirator in indoor public settings was associated with lower adjusted odds of a positive test result compared with never wearing a face mask or respirator. However, adjusted odds of positive test results suggested stepwise reductions in protection among participants who reported wearing a face mask or respirator most of the time or some of the time, and compared with participants who reported never wearing a face mask or respirator. Let's see, wearing an N95 or KN95 respirator or wearing surgical mask was associated with lower adjusted odds of a positive test result compared with wearing a mask. Wearing a cloth mask was associated with lower adjusted odds of having a positive test compared with never wearing a face covering, but was not statistically significant. Okay, so I guess everybody seems to be getting hung up on this. So, yeah, you can make the argument that something that because it's not statistically significant doesn't mean that it's also not relevant either. Like, as a general rule, I think that people wearing masks is actually a positive, especially for when it comes to public health. Like, I always thought it was unusual. Like, here, let me go into like anecdotal Andy territory, okay? Like, the thing that never really made a whole lot of sense about me whenever I watched anime is like I would see whenever like a character was like trying to sneak around or do something shady, they would dress up and wear a bunch of coats and jackets and everything, and they put on a face mask, and I was like, I could never understand why someone would, who is out in public trying to like make it so nobody recognizes them by wearing conspicuous clothes. Like, they would wear like these bright jackets and like try to make it look like they were sick, and they would put on sunglasses, so you couldn't see their eyes. But like that never like made any sense to me. It's like the Japan and other Asian countries, they totally embraced wearing face masks whenever somebody had some kind of sickness. So I always thought it was weird that, in the States we didn't really pick up on that as an idea. But, I think a lot of that has to do with maybe the stubbornness and the general stupidity of our country. But, what do I know? I'm just some dirty, disgusting weeb that's reading shit on the internet and is doing a better job than most people. Because, I can read, but you know what? You know what some people can do that's better than read? They can have money, which I don't have a whole lot of right now, but that's another thing. Maybe I should start a Patreon. I don't know. I doubt anybody actually watches any of this shit. Let's see. Discussion during February to December 2021, using a face mask or respirator in indoor public settings was associated with lower odds of acquiring SARS-CoV-2 infection, with the protection being highest among those who reported wearing a face mask or respirator all of the time. Although consistent use of any face mask or respirator indoor was protective, the adjusted odds of infections were lower among persons who reported typically wearing an N95KN respirator, followed by wearing a surgical mask. These data from real-world settings reinforce the importance of consistently wearing face masks or respirators to reduce the risk of acquisition of SARS-CoV-2 infection from among the general public in indoor community settings. These findings are consistent with the existing research demonstrating that face masks or respirators effectively filter viruses in laboratory settings, with the ecological studies showing reduction in SARS-CoV-2 incidents associated with community-level masking requirements. While the study evaluated the protective effectiveness of masks or respirators use in reducing the risk, the wearer acquires SARS-CoV-2 infection, a previous evaluation estimated the additional benefits of masking for source control and found that wearing face masks or respirators in the context of exposure to a person with confirmed SARS-CoV-2 infection was associated with similar reductions in risk for infection. Strengths of the current study include use of clinical endpoint of SARS-CoV-2 test results and the applicability to a general population sample. The findings in this report are subject to at least 8 limitations. First, the study did not account for other preventative behaviors that could influence risk for acquiring infection, including the adherence to physical distancing recommendations. In addition, the generalizability of this study is limited to persons seeking SARS-CoV-2 testing and who were willing to participate in a telephone interview, who might otherwise exercise other protective behaviors. Second, this analysis relied on an aggregate estimate of self-reported face mask or respirator use across for some participants. Multiple indoor public locations, however, the study was designed to minimize recall bias by enrolling both case and control participants within a 48-hour window of receiving the SARS-CoV-2 test results. Third, small strata limited the ability to differentiate between types of cloth masks or participants who wore different types of face masks in differing settings, and also resulted in wider CIs and statistical non-significance for some estimates that were suggestive of a protective effect. Fourth, estimates do not account for the face mask or respirator fit or the correctness of the face mask or respirator wearing. Assessing the effectiveness of face mask or respirator use under real-world conditions is nonetheless important for developing policy. Fifth, data collection occurred before the expansion of the SARS-CoV-2 Omicron variant, which is more transmissible than earlier variants. 6, face masks or respirators use was self-reported, which could introduce social desirability bias. 7th, small strata limited the ability to account for reasons for testing in the adjusted analysis, which may be correlated with face mask or respirator use. Finally, this analysis does not account for potential differences in the intensity of exposure, which could vary by duration, ventilation system, and activity in each of the various indoor public settings visited. All right. So here's some tables and some other technical junk. Like, I'll be quite honest with you. I think we just pretty much read the entirety of the paper. I'm not really able to parse anything that's on the tables. That's a bit beyond me, but that's because I'm not very smart. Let's see. So that's what the CDC says. This is what reason says. So that leaves a lot to unpack there. Let's see here. That framing is part of a broader pattern. In 2020, the CDC went from dismissing the value of general mask wearing to describe it as the most important, powerful health tool we have. In September 2020, then CDC Director Robert Redfield asserted, without any evidence, that masks were more effective at preventing infection than vaccines would prove to be, even before the spread of the highly contagious Omicron variant. Redfield's successor, Rochelle Walensky, implied the same thing, exaggerating the evidence supporting mask use in a way that made vaccinations seem inferior. The CDC consistently bends over backwards to validate its recommendation that everyone, including children as young as 2, wear masks. It is thereby undermining its already damaged credibility by distorting what we actually know. In this case, the CDC is asserting a causal relationship without considering alternative explanations for the results that it is touting. So maybe I have like brain scorpions, because I read the paper to you guys in the recording. So I don't know if someone can like actually go back through all of this and tell me whether or not any of that actually happens in that paper. Let's see. The researchers identified 1,528 California residents who tested positive for COVID-19 between February 18th and December 1st, 2021, then matched them to 1,511 California residents who tested negative. The controls, why is that in quotations, were similar to the cases in terms of age, sex, and the region of California they lived in, but not necessarily similar in other ways that could affect the odds of testing positive. Like what? That crucial point by itself means that it is impossible to say whether the masking accounts for the differences highlighted by the CDC. Okay. The mask analysis was limited to 652 cases and 1,176 controls who self-reported being in indoor public settings during the 2 weeks preceding testing, and who reported no known contact with anyone with confirmed or suspected SARS-CoV-2 infection during this time. Overall, the subjects who said they always wore masks indoor and public settings were 56% less likely to have tested positive than the subjects who said they never wore masks. The comparison presented in the CDC's graphic is based on a subgroup of 534 subjects who specified the type of face covering they typically used. It seems obvious that people who always wear masks indoor in public places are more COVID cautious than people who never do. While the researchers adjusted for vaccination, which unsurprisingly was more common among people who had tested negative, they did not account for other preventative behaviors that could influence risk for acquiring infection. If mask wearers tend to avoid crowded spaces, spend less time indoors with strangers, and or are more likely to keep their distance from other people, all of which are plausible, those precautions could partly or fully explain the differences that the CDC attributes to masking. I think we're living in the dark timeline. I really do. Let's see. Data from the study reinforced the point that masking rates were not the only potentially relevant way in which subjects who tested negative differed from subjects who tested positive. While 78% of COVID positive subjects sought out testing because they had symptoms consistent with the disease, that was the motivation for just 17% of the COVID-negative subjects. People in the latter group were nearly 50% more likely to say that they had sought testing simply because they were curious about whether they had been infected, a motivation that suggests greater concern and caution. The COVID-negative subjects were nearly 3 times as likely to report that they were tested because they were undergoing a medical procedure, a prospect that may have made them especially keen to avoid infection. While the possibility of systemic differences in other preventative behaviors is enough to reason to be skeptical of the way CDC is presenting these results, the study has several other problems. When the researchers called people for interviews, just 13% of those people who had tested positive and 9% of those who had tested negative answered the phone and agreed to participate. Those low participation marks make you wonder how representative the people interviewed by the researchers were. Let's see. The COVID positive people who did not answer the phone may have been especially ill, for example, while the COVID negative people who did participate may have been especially eager to discuss their experiences, perhaps because they had dodged the virus and attributed the outcome to precautions such as masking. The researchers note that the generalizability of the study is limited to persons seeking SARS-CoV-2 testing and who were willing to participate in a telephone interview who might otherwise exercise protective behaviors. The fact that people knew their own test results may have introduced another bias. I guess I have brain scorpions because I definitely didn't read how the study was trying to eliminate biases, but here we go. Somebody with a very big brain claiming that their biases in this report. People who wore masks but nevertheless caught COVID-19 may have inferred that they were not as careful as they should have been, making them less likely to report that they always took that precaution. Conversely, people who tested negative may have retrospectively exaggerated the extent to which they wore masks. University of California, San Francisco epidemiologist Vinay Prasad, who discusses these and other weaknesses of the study in a recent Substack post, also notes that the purported effects described by the CDC are implausibly large. Last September, a report on a randomized trial in Bangladesh described an 11% reduction in the risk of symptomatic infection among villagers who wore surgical masks. Now the CDC is claiming that surgical masks lower the odds of testing positive by 66% and in effect 6 times as large. While Naski, meanwhile, has averred that wearing a mask reduces your chance of infection by more than 80%, although the CDC cited no evidence to support the startling claim. How much more of this shit is there? Okay. You know what? I'm going to stop here because I've been probably rambling for longer than I probably should. And you know what? The thing that really gets me right now is like I work in retail, so I have to deal a lot with people making baseless assertions, especially when it comes to COVID. And my shit's hard enough as it is, and I don't understand why there's so much pushback on the fact that just wear a mask. That's it. Just wear a mask. I recently had COVID. I went through an entire week that I can't get back, and it didn't kill me. But the argument that I keep hearing from people is if you're young, you don't need to get vaccinated. You'll be just fine. But what I went through when I had COVID, I'm kind of glad that I was vaccinated, because if I hadn't been, I think I would have been right back in the hospital. Because I remember a couple years ago, I had pneumonia, and I became septic, and I spent an entire week in the hospital, and I almost died. So, yeah, I think it was good that I was vaccinated, and that I didn't die from COVID. But you know, it my experience is largely I just stayed home. I didn't go anywhere, and I spent the majority of my time sleeping. I was also kind of loaded up on Dayquil the entire time too. But yeah, I mean, I passed the time by sleeping the majority of the time. Anyway, thank you all for watching whatever this was. This is largely supposed to be an informative piece, because I mean, I can't help but, like, I don't know. I'm doing what some people really should be doing, which is actually reading stuff and maybe applying some critical thinking and actually coming to their own conclusions, rather than allowing some kind of right-wing magazine do the thinking for them. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe, do whatever you want. If I get enough reaction, maybe I will actually open up a Patreon and do some kind of live stream. I don't know. I have ideas. Anyway, thanks for watching again. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Have a good day. And hopefully the weather gets better. It's been really overcast and it sucks. And I probably sound like shit, but oh well. Anyway,